If, in the deep sanctum of your soul, you have ever sensed a strange and profound lack each time you utter the identity of the Savior, if you have perceived a hallowed frequency that your lips cannot reach, a sacred communion that slips through your grasp, dissolving into the void, then what is about to be revealed will utterly dismantle your perceptions and unlock a gateway that has been sealed for 2 millennia. 4. Seeker of the truth, the name you have been taught, the name etched into the edited Holy Scriptures, is not the name spoken by the Mother, by the disciples, or by any who truly walked with him under the Galilean sun. Hear now, not with the mortal ear, but with the hidden energy center within your chest. The name spoken by those who loved him, reverberating in the ancient atmosphere of Jerusalem, is YESHUA. This disparity is not merely phonetic. It is not a harmless scribal error or an inconsequential linguistic shift. N-O. This difference is an energetic cataclysm. It is a diversion of the sacred current. It is the missing key to an infinite cipher. When you grasp what was buried in that seemingly simple change of identity, you will understand why the great churches and the institutions of power meticulously laid their traps, employing the most extraordinary measures to conceal it. This is not blasphemy, nor is it disrespect to any faith. This is a pilgrimage back to the source, an urgent effort to recover the primal current stolen from humanity. We will not only know why they changed his identity, we will understand what that original true name activates within you, and what creative energy it releases from the chains of fear and control. In the language of God and the prophets, every sound, every vibration carries a defined cosmic frequency. Identity is not a label. Identity is resonance. The word Jesus is the product of a complex chain of geographical and linguistic translation, from Yeshua, the Hebrew and Aramaic root, to Isus in Greek, then to Isus in Latin, before taking its current form. In that transmission, 3 vital elements were lost. First, the connection to the identity of God, YHWH. The name Yeshua means YHWH is salvation. It directly contains the sound of the Tetragrammaton, the sound said to have created the universe. When the sound YHWH is omitted or replaced, the direct link between the caller and the source is severed. Second, the opening vibration. Scholars of the Arcane and the Kabbalah affirm that the sound of Yeshua is a specific vibrational sequence designed to activate certain energy centers, chakras within the human body, unlocking the indwelling divine potential. It is an acoustic code. Third, the breath of life. In Hebrew, the identity Yeshua is a flow, a living breath. Translators, in shifting it to other language systems, inadvertently or intentionally, turned it into a static, frozen, and unemotional noun. They replaced the flowing river with a block of ice. When you call upon the Savior by the translated name, you are calling through a dense veil. You touch his memory, but you do not touch his spirit power. History proves that whenever truth is delivered directly to the individual, the institutions of power collapse. Yeshua's original teachings granted every person the ability to connect directly with God, making them their own Christs. This posed an intolerable threat to the rising religious and political empires. To control this monumental spiritual flow, a system of intermediary was required. And the most efficient way to establish that mediation is through the control of language and the spiritual code. The alteration of the true name was not an oversight. It was a grand theological conspiracy. They executed this concealment in the corridors of Roman power, in councils presided over by emperors, not prophets, for 3 primary purposes. The first was assimilation, to transform a Jewish sage named Yeshua into a universalized symbol, Jesus, more readily accepted by the polytheistic Greco-Roman world. The second was establishing monopoly, to make the primal frequency inaccessible. Only the officially trained clergy and scholars held the right to interpret and intermediate the modified identity, thus stripping the masses of their direct spiritual sovereignty. The third was de-energization, to diminish the vibrational potency of the name, transforming it into a symbol for distant adoration, rather than a tool for self-liberation. The era of concealment has ended. The fog of history is dissipating. The time has come to stop calling through the crude layers of translation, and to begin calling him directly by the language of the source. When you bravely utter Yeshua, with the full comprehension of its sacred meaning, you are not merely naming a great man, you are activating a sealed channel of connection. You are declaring freedom from all mediation. You are unlocking the doorway to Christ consciousness within your own heart. Because the essential nature of the Yeshua message is not a call to worship an external deity, but an awakening of the indwelling divine potential within each of us. Let us begin this journey of declassification precisely where the fabrication took root, in the dark corridors of earthly power, and not in the dazzling halls of heaven. Be ready. The truth awaits. The epic ballad of illumination and the shadow of the Roman Empire. When the curtain of history rises upon the dim and tumultuous dawn of the 4th century Anno Domini, the mighty Roman Empire, that titan which governed the entire Western world, was leaning precariously toward the abyss. The greatness of the 7 hills had been eclipsed by the shadow of decay and a bottomless hunger for supremacy. Rome was not collapsing due to the assaults of northern barbarians. It was being torn asunder from within by its own deep, festering wounds. This was an age of protracted crisis, where currency had lost its value, where the once loyal legions now served the highest bidder rather than an ideal, and where religious fracture proved a blade sharper than any battlefield steel. At the dizzying height of temporal power, the Roman throne was no longer a symbol of unity, but the stage for the bloody rivalries of the Tetrarchy, whose conflicts ravaged the governing structure. More dangerous than political infighting, however, was the schism deep within the empire's collective soul. The ancient doctrines of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus were losing their reverence. Temples stood abandoned, and the social cohesion built upon the worship of the emperor and the traditional gods was crumbling into dust. And into the center of that fateful storm stepped the Emperor Flavius Valerius Aurelius Constantinus, the man ordained by fate to redefine, or at least reorganize, the Roman destiny. Constantine was no philosopher seeking sacred truth, nor was he a humble devotee. He was a notorious warrior, a brilliant military architect, and, above all, a superlative political pragmatist. For Constantine, religious faith was not a path to personal salvation. It was the most potent instrument of administration ever devised. He did not seek God. He sought absolute uniformity of thought across millions of subjects to consolidate his personal power and restore the tottering imperial order. Yet, Constantine faced one paramount and intractable problem: a spiritual malignancy within the imperial body, the followers of Yeshua. For centuries they had been hunted, cast to the beasts, yet they could not be eradicated. They were the Whisperers, a group fostering individual revelation, unbound by the court's law and structure. Their very existence was anathema to Rome's demand for uniformity for profound systemic reasons. 1. Decentralization. The followers of Yeshua gathered in dark homes, damp catacombs, or humble workshops. They did not build magnificent public temples like the Pantheon, where imperial power could be easily enforced through public ceremony. Their worship was secretive, personal, and spontaneous. An empire demanding top-down control could not tolerate an invisible, fragmented web of faith without state-sanctioned hierarchical clergy. 2. Mysticism and direct experience. Most dangerous to Constantinian rule was their core teaching of direct, unmediated divine experience. These devotees spoke of a personal hotline to the Almighty. They required no royally appointed priests to interpret Scripture, and they claimed to receive direct instruction from the Spirit. In a culture predicated on the mediation of the priesthood, the Pontifex Maximus, and the deification of the emperor's supreme status, the notion of a private connection to heaven was the ultimate subversion of the power structure. If every person could hear God without Caesar, where did Caesar's authority reside? 3. Higher obedience. Finally, their allegiance to a king not of this world, the Christos, created an unacceptable duality of loyalty. They were willing to endure death rather than offer incense before the emperor's statue. Their fealty was eternal, their loyalty to the empire merely temporal. This was the mortal danger. Constantine did not fear opposition, he feared lack of control. He did not seek a new religion to worship, he sought a new unifying instrument. To solidify the empire, the chaotic, decentralized, and intensely personal mysticism of the Yeshua followers had to be tamed. What was needed was a robust, clearly hierarchical organization, a church that could operate as an extended administrative arm of the Roman state itself. Constantine had no use for mystics. He needed managers. and he was prepared to use every stratagem to forge that fragmented light of faith into a single, Roman-controlled torch. That was the gambit that permanently altered the course of history. The fateful assembly of Nicaea, when imperial power touched faith. And so Constantine the Great, having seized the reins of power beneath the Roman eagles and wearing the diadem of the seven eternal hills, issued a shattering summons, not for war or conquest, but for the spiritual unity of an empire being torn asunder by heresies. He convened the Council of Nicaea, a fateful rendezvous on the Aegean shore, where sacred history and profane politics were compelled to confront one another in the same great assembly hall. This was no simple meeting. It was an event that compelled the entire fragile network of the nascent faith to gather, dragging themselves across perilous distances, from the hermitages of the Egyptian desert to the remotest reaches of Europe and Asia Minor. Subsequent accounts claim 318 bishops converged, each carrying distinct creeds, scorching controversies, and ancient texts preserved over generations. The sheer magnitude of the event transcended all religious bounds. When the shepherds of the Christian community entered the Great Hall of Nicaea, they did not merely step into a church. They stepped into a center of imperial might, where the aura of Emperor Constantine shone down, casting a colossal shadow over every ensuing debate. The naked truth is that what transpired next, in the collective memory where the Holy Spirit was meant to descend and revelation made manifest, bore the grim shape of a cold political calculation. This was not a moment of divine inspiration, but a great legislative session of the faith. They voted. Literally, they raised their hands in an act simultaneously democratic and theologically absolute, to decide which texts would form the central, essential corpus of a unified faith, and which documents must be forever expunged from the current of history. They negotiated doctrine, weighing every phrase, every theory, to preserve certain teachings and declare others spurious or heretical. The ultimate objective was not the search for absolute veracity, but the construction of a robust, unshakable ideological foundation that Constantine could use as the binding agent for his sprawling multicultural empire. At that singular moment in history, the treasury of knowledge regarding Jesus and the apostles was a breathtakingly rich confusion. Dozens of varying gospels, epistles, and instructional texts circulated among the scattered congregations. There were the Gospels of Thomas, of Mary Magdalene, of Peter. Texts that championed mystical knowledge over ecclesiastical obedience. Each text was a different voice, a distinct perspective on the divine and human nature of the Christ. But at Nicaea, the winnowing occurred with the cruel ruthlessness of history's blade. A select few texts, already enjoying widespread acceptance, were stamped with imperial approval, becoming the recognized canonical core, a small collection given the seal of the empire, and the countless other documents. Their fate was dispersal. Some were condemned, declared heresy, and consumed in the fires of purification. Others were merely lost, sinking into oblivion through the slow erosion of time and conflict. And some, bearing secrets too vast or too perilous for the structure of the new church, were quietly concealed. They were interred in clay jars, carried into exile in the isolated caves of the Egyptian desert, where they slept in darkness, far from the gaze of the world that had rejected them, awaiting 15 centuries to be brought once more into the light of humanity, and to tell the story of the voices that had been silenced. Yet the most profound historical transformation was not merely in which books were placed upon the altar or thrown into the pyre. The most essential and radical change lay with the very man who convened the council, Emperor Constantine. By inserting his hand into the establishment of doctrine, he forged an entirely new paradigm. From that moment forward, the Christian faith ceased to be an underground movement, persecuted and purely spiritual. It became an institution, a pillar of secular power. Constantine did not merely legalize a religion, he defined it. He bound the power of the heavenly kingdom to the absolute authority of the Roman Imperium. He transformed the personal, mystical relationship between man and the divine into a formalized organizational structure, complete with a clear hierarchy, established rules, and, most crucially, the sponsorship and control of a monarch. When the bishops departed the Council of Nicaea, they carried with them more than a new creed. They carried a new concept of the world, one in which the imperial crown had permanently blended with the cross, establishing a potent, sacred alliance whose resonance echoes even today. This institutional and traditional power, established not merely to govern belief or manipulate the message, was tasked with the far greater act of architecting the very messenger who bore it. These forces had to forge the chosen one's identity, mind, and lineage, ensuring that the spoken word carried not just individual weight, but the full historical and divine authority of the system itself. And the most fundamental intervention, stemming from the very root of existence, was the sacred nomenclature bestowed upon him, YESHUA. This name was no mere accident of history, it was a divine revelation preordained since the Genesis. In the ancient sacred Hebrew tongue, the appellation YESHUA encompassed a declaration echoing through the cosmos: Yahweh Yeshua, the Lord saves. It is simplified, yet fiercely potent when translated simply as salvation, an eternal promise, a primal aspiration etched upon the lips of man, laid down as the bedrock of the mission. The name YESHUA could not be relegated to a superficial label or a simple identifying mark. According to ancient and esoteric Hebraic tradition, the name was the very code, the spiritual formula created to summon the truth of existence. They were invisible frequencies, vibrations that shaped the energetic field and vital centers of the possessor, establishing the boundary between essence and void. In that era, one truth was honored. To know the true name of a person was to possess the key to their deepest essence, to touch the wellspring of their hidden power, and thus to control their destiny. The name itself was the ultimate strength. Therefore, the act of naming was never a casual or emotional whim of the parents. It was a high prophetic ritual, an act unifying the human will with the divine decree. It was believed absolutely that the chosen name would not merely describe but literally create the path, shaping the mission and the essential destiny of the child. The name was the inscribed law, the map of the vocation bestowed, before the child even uttered its first cry. For this reason, the name YESHUA is no dead word. It is a living entity, a declaration bearing the gravity of heaven, a celestial writ of deliverance. It is not something to be merely pronounced carelessly upon the tongue. It is the name that must be inhaled into the lungs, its fierce tremor felt deep within the bone marrow and the bloodstream. It resonates like an awakening bell, reverberating within the chest cavity like sacred lightning. It is too activating, too empowering, carrying such a profound current of sacred power that it cannot be dismissed or overlooked. When uttered, it is not simply a greeting. It is the instantaneous confirmation of ultimate purpose, the liberation of absolute energy, transforming the bearer into the living embodiment of the salvation awaited by the entire cosmos. And this, then, was the inescapable, fated reason why that primal name had to be chiseled down, bent, and utterly stripped of its soul. The empire, a colossal engine of absolute order and relentless assimilation, could tolerate no anomaly capable of resisting the authority of the Roman edicts and the terrible edge of the imperial sword. The imperium demanded a designation easily Latinized, a symbol whose wild roots and Semitic holiness were surgically excised. It had to be domesticated, rendered a brand name, simple to summon and simple to control, fit to be shouted from distant garrison encampments to the marbled halls of the Senate. That name, if its original resonance persisted, would forever be a subversive prayer, a key capable of unlocking spiritual dimensions far beyond the emperor's grasp. For this reason, a philological violence commenced. The identity known as YESHUA, meaning salvation, or Yahweh saves, began its agonizing journey through the linguistic filters of the conquerors. First, it entered the harsh millstone of the Greek tongue. Hellenic speech, focused on syllabic flow and logic, lacked the airy sh sound, the sound of the divine breath, the ruach. It also possessed no final ein, the deep, guttural utterance that connected the speaker to the earth and the source of life. The initial yod, the sound of beginning, was replaced by the thin iota. This was ruthlessly eradicated, transformed into the dry and sterile sibilant of s. YESHUA became Isis, a spectral half-form, a shell hollowed out for easier transit. Next, that distorted shadow was delivered into the ultimate tongue of power, Latin. The language of legions and decrees carved into marble slabs received and nailed the new name down. Idisuus hardened into Idisus. Here, the transformation was more than phonetics. It was the branding iron of the imperium. The holy name was now coded, mandated henceforth to obey the law and the order of Rome, not the heavens. And then, after centuries wandering the Shadowlands, as European history turned, one final and definitive shift occurred. In the 17th century, as the letter J, a harsh, heavy sound, utterly foreign to ancient Hebrew, Greek, or Latin, was accepted into the English alphabet, Iesous was finally forced into the last gyre of deformation, becoming Jesus. Every translation was an exposure. Every transliteration was an act of theft. With each progressive shift, something invaluable was violently torn from the grasp of humanity. The primal breath, the vibration of the sh and u sounds, born of the lungs and the lips, that connected the speaker to the divine frequency and the cosmic energy. The resonant cipher, the essential nature of the original name as an internal mantra, which, when properly pronounced, unlocked vibrational harmony with the unseen dimension. The root heart, the unmediated authenticity, the connection to the Semitic origins, and the spirituality of the desert. It is not that the name Jesus is invalid or without its own sanctity, but the tragedy resides in this truth. It is the echo of an echo. It is the photographic copy of a copy. The original name, full of divine vibration and holy breath, has been pulled beyond your reach. It remains locked beneath the linguistic strata piled by the empire, discoverable only by those who dare to listen past the manufactured reverberations imposed by history. Hark, all ye who listen, pause now and contemplate the paramount truth which the vast majority of mankind has either carelessly forgotten, or which the veils of history have been intentionally deployed to obscure. They perceive this transformation as mere natural linguistic evolution. Verily, all languages are fluid, shifting in cadence, meaning, and tone across the ceaseless current of time. Yet the profound depth lies not in the shift itself, but in the moment of its explosive onset, coupled with the meticulously engineered cultural context. This was not the idle drift of chance. This was an intent, a deep and architectonic doctrine decreed by those forces that seized ultimate dominion. The invisible hand of the power structure. The very mechanisms, the immense and most powerful religious institutions, which held the power to decree which scripture might endure, which manuscript must be burned, and which sealed away in hidden vaults. These were the invisible hands that manipulated and sculpted the Holy Liturgy and the sacred grammatical structure. They did not merely bend belief. They ordained the very appellations the populace was permitted to utter, the syllables they were commanded to memorize when naming the Most High. This subtle arrangement was not executed in the service of spiritual clarity, but solely for the consolidation of intermediary power. These forces, while preaching salvation through their established ecclesiastical structures, simultaneously fashioned a religious dialect of bondage, a coded lexicon designed to hold the believer at a vast and terrifying remove from direct spiritual experience, independent of the clergy's sanction. The semantic bulwark. They erected a mighty bulwark of sound and meaning. The ultimate purpose was not reverence, but isolation. They did not simply desire worship of the Redeemer. They absolutely required that you worship Him as a perpetual separate entity, forever divorced from the mortal substance of your own being. The alteration of the name, the fine semantic shift in the theological terminology, successfully constructed the image of a God seated upon a diamond throne, transcendent and infinitely remote. He must be the incarnate inviolable, the unapproachable one, whose sanctity casts an oppressive shadow upon every soul below. He must be the one who cannot be fully fathomed, nor reached through individual striving. That very depiction was vital to maintaining unconditional reliance upon the system that architected the language itself. The grand betrayal of potential. For that which the system needed to conceal, that which the semantic changes buried beneath the dust of ages, was the earth-shattering truth concerning the potentiality of man. They stole the pristine concept that he was not a God eternally beyond the sphere of human striving, but a mortal man who had achieved self-perfection, a human being who ascended to become the living incarnation of the highest state. He stands as the most eloquent proof of the grand possibility dwelling within your very bone and sinew, you who kneel, you who feel forever sullied and small. He became what you yourself might yet become through discipline and gnosis. This system performed a dark miracle. They transformed a shining mirror of human potential into a cold, lifeless icon of worship, set in a place where no mortal gaze might reach. They stripped humanity of its divine inheritance. burying the potential for achieved divinity within every soul, by nothing more than a precise and deliberate alteration in the names and structure of the sacred tongue. And that indeed is the truth missed by the great multitude. Salvation was redefined, not as liberation, but as eternal bondage. Hear me now, O ye seekers of the true light, for this is the grand arcanum, the ultimate secret buried beneath the glare of the noonday sun, obscured by the dust of ages and the hardened strata of dogma, the ultimate mystery which all earthbound edifices of power sought to corrupt and distort is this: YESHUA, the illumined teacher, did not raise his scepter demanding blind fealty. He desired not that humanity should bow to his image as a distant god enthroned on high. His supreme purpose was to bestow the key to the great inheritance. He taught them the method by which they might arise and become the light unto themselves. He called not for dependence, but proclaimed the absolute sovereignty of the soul. Contemplate the declaration that shook the very firmament, the promise that cannot be undone. The works that I do, you shall do also, and greater works than these. This was not the foundation upon which to build a cult, nor an institution structured by hierarchical power. It was a prophecy of limitless potential, a map leading to the primal gate, where every individual realizes themselves as the master of an internal universe. It was a cosmic challenge. It was liberation itself. But the true paths, alas, always lead to absolute self-mastery. And should the populace begin to walk that way, the path of self-discovery, self-reliance, and self-illumination, then the power of the institution shall crumble like shifting sand. They shall have no need of haughty intermediaries wearing robes of manufactured authority. They shall require neither elaborate ritual nor walls dividing the sacred from the profane. The might of the theocracies can persist only if and when they control the scarcity of the divine. If all souls recognize the infinite source that flows within their very blood and spirit, then the monopoly upon belief shall shatter. They shall seek no external permission to touch the celestial flame. They shall realize that what they seek in distant temples lies dormant, sealed deep within their hearts, their own divine essence. And this is the moment that all mortal power fears utterly. To avert this comprehensive release, a grand spiritual surgery was required. Thus, the name, the symbol of self-sovereignty, had to be buried beneath layers of personal veneration. The revelatory teachings, which were living fire, had to be filtered through the narrow cloth of interpretation, becoming dead law books. The mystical, which is direct communion with the primal force, must be transmuted into the theological, where belief outweighs revelation. Individual power was shifted into collective ritual. The path was made into a sumptuously adorned prison, where the key to the shackles was hidden within the very hand of the prisoner. They bent the way back into the circle, forcing the soul to repeat the cycle of dependency, so that the power of the gatekeepers might never be threatened. And that is how the secret of humanity's divinity was smothered, in the clang of the bell, in empty prayer, and in the worship of a king who was robbed of his greatest legacy, absolute liberty. The proclamation of name and being. Perhaps now, a seemingly harmless question stirs in the deep recesses of your minds. Can a designation, a mere name, truly possess such weight and profound power? And that, O people, is precisely the insidious belief the hidden powers wish you to embrace. They seek to soothe your inquiry by minimizing the importance of the name, reducing it to a meaningless semantic game, a hollow traditional habit, or simply language performing its utilitarian function, affixing a label. They desire your conviction that a name is nothing but the arbitrary convenience of sound, a mere tool to differentiate one object from another, one soul from the next. But this is the truth concealed from millennia. The name is never arbitrary. Specifically, in the ancient Hebraic tradition, where every letter composing a name contained a cosmic codex, the name was not merely the essence of being, it was the blueprint of destiny, a declaration of creative authority. To diminish the potency of the name is the first stroke of intellectual servitude. If you cease to believe in the power residing in a name, you will never ask the ultimate question: what is my own true identity? Let us turn the tide of time back to the tumultuous year of 1945, when the ashes of a world war had settled, and mankind stood bewildered upon the threshold of the nuclear age. Amidst the chaos of modern history, In a forgotten corner of Egypt, far from the blinding lights of the great cathedrals and museums, a fateful event transpired. The place was the desolate desert near a small town called Nag Hammadi. The seeker was a farmer, not a theologian nor a scholar, but a simple laborer scraping the dust for fertilizer upon his barren ground. And then his hoe struck something hard, not stone, but fired clay. It was the precise moment that the buried past, interred for more than 15 centuries, decided to reveal itself. Beneath the scorching sand, dark earthenware jars rested in fearful stillness, holding tightly sealed papyrus scrolls, preserved with unnatural longevity. They had been hidden deliberately, buried in the darkness, waiting for the exact moment when the ears of mankind were prepared to listen. Within those vessels lay an entire library of ancient knowledge, but none more startling than a collection of explosive teachings, the Gospel of Thomas. This was a sequence of oracles, direct precepts that the forming ecclesiastical powers had vehemently removed from the gradually ossifying official canon. They were deemed dangerous, heresy, an absolute dissolution of the structures of authority, and thus they were required to be eradicated from history. But now they have returned, carrying a message fundamentally distinct. In these hidden sayings, the emphasis shifts radically. No longer was the call, "Worship me," the entity separate from your being. Instead came the divine and urgent imperative, "Know thyself, identify your own essence." Gone was the promise of a distant paradise, attainable only after death and through convoluted ceremony. In its place stood a truth so explosive, it shattered all boundaries between the material and the divine. "Split the piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me." This message is a philosophical and spiritual revolution. The kingdom is not merely approaching, it is already manifest. It is not a future political event, nor a specific geographical location. It is already here, now, woven into every fleeting moment, every grain of dust, every most common action of life. The issue is not the kingdom's absence. The issue is that you have been searching in the wrong location. And according to those buried Coptic scrolls, the silent witnesses to a suppressed truth, that location is not a temple built of mortar and stone. It is not a dogma defended by the ramparts of fear. It is not a throne placed upon the highest cloud. The sole location to find the eternal and the whole is nowhere else but in the deepest, most sacred recesses of your own heart. Turn back. Look within. The name of the kingdom is your own name. And this very truth, this internal revelation, sowed ultimate terror in the heart of the empire. They trembled not before external armies, but before the explosive freedom of the divine within their own subjects, souls. For if the divine resided wholly within you, in this bone, this breath, this bloodstream, what need was there then for external kingship, for shackling doctrines, or for layers of profane intermediaries? This was a mortal threat to the established order, to the power built upon fear and separation, the sacred coup d'etat. And so, with cold cunning and ruthless cruelty, they intervened in the river of history. With an invisible knife of distortion, they changed the name. They rewrote the story. They stripped the sacred core from a master who taught internal awakening and molded him into a godhead, reigning from a distant, splendid, and chilling heaven. They transferred the seat of authority from the temple within your own breast to a remote throne, accessible only through the gates of ritual and unquestioning submission. They transformed Christ consciousness, a state of being you could fully embody, realize, and explode into Christ the King, a majestic figure before whom you could only kneel from a hopeless distance, across fences of ceremony and law. They codified humanity's ascension into a simple narrative of unilateral worship. The YESHUA cipher, the hidden map. But history is a river that keeps its secrets, and the original seed could not be utterly destroyed. The primordial name was preserved, whispered in the hidden corners of human memory, awaiting the hour of illumination. Now, you are about to pull back the veil and uncover the true substance contained within that name. The name YESHUA, it is more than a mere title. It is a cipher, inscribed in 4 ancient Hebrew letters, each a layer of cosmic meaning, understood clearly by anyone raised in that tradition. This is not merely a lesson in linguistics. When you decode it, You do not simply learn etymology, you unlock a map, a formula for radical transformation, hidden in plain sight. Let us step together into this journey of decipherment, passing through the gate of revelation. The 4 pillars of ascent. These are the 4 letters that constitute the YESHUA cipher, each representing an indispensable step on the path from the mortal to the divine. 1. YUD, the primal spark. This is the first letter. The smallest, yet it holds infinite power. Its shape is a point. Yud represents Keter, the crown in the tree of life. It is the divine spark. It is the creative hand of the universe, a quintessential seed of consciousness, ready to burst into reality. It is the ultimate recognition that your essence, from the very first moment, is already saturated with divine energy and infinite potential. It is the consciousness of Source. 2. Shin, the flame of transformation, the second letter. Its image is the erupting fire. Shin is not gentle light, but the spiritual crucible. It is the thorough and necessary purification. For the divine to awaken and reside permanently, the layers of illusion, the shackles of the old ego, must be incinerated to dust. This is the courage to face and surpass fear, allowing destruction to occur so that the new, the authentic self, may be born from the ashes. 3. VAV, the axis of connection. The third letter. Its image is a nail or a hook. Vav is the bridge, the axis mundi. It is the spiritual spine, the electromagnetic cord that pulls energy from heaven down to the earth, connecting the highest consciousness to the profane material. It is the realization, the grounding, the persistent practice required to make the spark Yud that has been purified Shin a tangible reality in the physical realm. Vav is the unification of the 2 opposing poles. 4. AIN, the window of perception, the 4th letter. Not the physical eye, but the window of soul perception or the wellspring. Ain is the opening of the 3rd sight, the well of deep wisdom and direct comprehension. After passing through the fire Shin and becoming connected Vav, you see the world no longer through the lens of fear, separation, or falsehood, but with the absolute clarity of truth. This is the completion of the process, where the soul knows itself to be an inseparable part of the cosmos. The final formula. Behold what occurs when these 4 energies, these 4 steps, converge in a singular cycle of ascension. The name YESHUA describes the journey where the divine spark Yud passes through the cleansing fire of transformation Shin, is anchored steadfastly to connect heaven and earth Vav, and finally opens the window of spiritual perception Ayin. The name YESHUA never described a man to be worshipped from afar, it describes a process. It is not an outward prayer, hoping for salvation from an omnipotent deity reigning in the heavens, but an inward invitation, a guide carved into the very letters for self-salvation, to become your own master. This is the supreme essence that was concealed. Transformation is a science, and divinity is a state awaiting your embodiment. Let those who seek the hidden truth now incline their ear. This is the place where the abyss of knowledge is rendered visible. This is where the mystery deepens, where we touch the divine architecture of language itself. The sacred name, YESHUA, is not merely an appellation. It is a hidden echo, a direct reflection of the most holy name in the Hebrew tongue, the Tetragrammaton. Those 4 sacred letters, YHWH, are the very essence of the Godhead, so archetypal, so utterly primal, that they were deemed too holy for mortal lips to utter. It is the schema of creation, the fundamental architecture of the cosmos, an unutterable mandate. But behold YESHUA Yod He Shin Vav He. Within the structure of this nomenclature, a mystical event is found. The letters Yod and Vav, essential elements of YHWH, are integrated as pillars. The Yod represents the divine spark, the point of origin, and the Vav is the connecting cord, the bridge, the way linking the eternal to the temporal. Ancient mystics and Kabbalists perceived the name YESHUA as the living embodiment of the name YHWH itself. The unpronounceable secret has been given voice, shape, accessibility, and above all, humanity. This is the ultimate act of grace, transforming the mute sound of the Almighty into the utterance of man. YESHUA is the solution to a cosmic equation. how the boundless Ein Sof may enter the domain of the limited Malkuth without shattering it. The name is the vessel holding the essence of resurrection and revelation. Turn inward now, for this sacred mystery is not confined to the high heavens or ancient scrolls. It is inscribed upon your very frame. The human body is not a common prison of flesh, but the supreme temple, the mystical laboratory, where the divine spark begins its destined work of completion. The ancient masters described a subtle inner anointing, intrinsically linked to the skull and the spinal column. This is a chemico-spiritual event, an invisible, immaculate current. Modern science calls this the cerebrospinal fluid, the life-sustaining water of the nervous system. But for the ancients, this holy presence, the God flow descending from the brain, was the Christos, the sacred oil, the very essence of the Anointed One. When the Christos flow first descends, it carries pure potential, a seed of light sown into the bedrock of the physical form. It flows down like unconditional grace, yet in this state, it remains a slumbering potential, a deeply secured treasure. This is where sovereignty must be practiced. For that potential to blossom, it must return to its origin. If you conquer the self, if you master your primal instincts and align your energies, the Christos flow will not dissipate. Instead, it will be transmuted and commence the great ascension. It travels upward, climbing through the 33 vertebrae of your spine. Picture these 33 segments not merely as biological structures, but as 33 gates, 33 degrees of refinement, 33 trials the soul must overcome. Your spine is the inner axis mundi, connecting the earth to the celestial realms. This sublimation is a battle of chemistry and focused will. The flow must be preserved, refined through rigorous discipline, and pushed upward by the counter-gravitational force of focused awareness. Every vertebra conquered is a victory over shadow, a step toward the primordial light. The journey continues, past the centers of the heart and the throat, until, upon the symbolic map of the spirit, it attains the center of the head, the nexus where intellect and soul converge. This is the place of the crown and the third eye, where the subtle centers of perception are ordained to open. In the very moment the Christos oil is lifted and completes its circuit at the crown, a seismic event of consciousness occurs. The light explodes not without, but within. The inner eye, the third eye of wisdom, opens. Every veil concealing the truth of your own nature is violently torn away. This is one of the profoundest ways to grasp the meaning of the second coming. It is not the image of a majestic deity descending from earthly clouds to judge the world. That depiction is merely symbolic language, provided for the unawakened multitude. The genuine second coming is a promise fulfilled within the interior landscape of every dedicated seeker. It is total awakening, the moment when human consciousness, previously chained in the realm of matter, liberates itself and ascends, recognizing itself as the personal Godhead. The second coming is the ascension of awareness. It is not God descending, but man ascending to meet the self in the eternal light. It is revelation requiring neither angel nor thunder, demanding only absolute stillness and unyielding self-mastery. In your deepest sanctuary, the temple is sanctified, the oil is raised, and the nameless name is now declared in the blinding silence of the enlightened body. Seek him not in the heavens above, but in the depth of this sacred column. The institutional church, with its solemn spires and complex architecture of power, perceived a mortal threat. They meticulously buried, or else deliberately obscured, the dazzling brilliance of the most primordial teachings. This was no mere error of doctrine, but a meticulously executed strategy. For from the vantage point of the ruling hierarchy, should the great multitude recognize that they possess an internal Savior, the Son of Heaven, ready to rise from the depths of the soul, an inner flame requiring no external sustenance, then the outer empires, the thrones built upon fear and dependence, would crumble into dust. When man independently unlocks his own treasure, he ceases to be a beggar at the church door. The dependent are the most easily governed, and the controller must forever perpetuate an unquenchable craving. And so the appellation YESHUA of Hebrew root, signifying the soul's awakening and radical individuality, was deliberately dimmed. It was replaced by the solemn Latinized form, Jesus, which became the central name in ostentatious rituals and official translations. The epicenter of the spiritual journey was ruthlessly shifted. Instead of encouraging the excavation of the spiritual goldmine within each person, they redirected the focus toward the worship of formulaic rites, canonical texts, selectively edited scriptures, and unconditional submission to hierarchical authority. They offered carefully excised scriptural passages, declaring them the supreme word, the sole core utterances necessary for salvation. They erected a monument of dogma and law, forcing the soul to kneel before that monument. But let this be understood. Belief and knowing are not synonymous. Submission and liberation are two poles that shall never meet. The Greek term employed for faith in this controlling context is pistis. Pistis signifies trust, reliance upon external doctrines and transmitted teachings, a confidence placed in an intermediary. It is the crutch offered to those who fear to look into their own shadow, the sweet promise that if you merely believe, you shall be saved. This is a passive faith, designed to keep you forever the pupil, never attaining the stature of the master. Yet Yeshua, the teacher within, bequeathed a separate path, preserved within the esoteric currents, scorned as heresy. He did not demand blind subservience. He taught gnosis, direct comprehension, internal experience, the knowledge certified by the very marrow and spiritual vibration of the self. Gnosis is self-generated light. It is the absolute recognition that divinity is not a distant reward, but your own inherent nature. One path binds the soul in the fetters of dependence, rendering you subject to the structure, to the interpreter, to a fixed history. It makes you a slave to a fragile hope. The other path, gnosis, conversely bestows the key to absolute freedom. It declares the sovereignty of the soul. One path promises salvation in a distant future, long after death has knocked upon the gate, or reverts to an untouchable, mythical past, a history you may only observe from afar. The path of Yeshua, the path of internal knowledge, declares that salvation is neither a historical event nor a posthumous reward. It is a state of being. It places wholeness and illumination directly within the moment of the eternal present. Salvation resides in the attention, in the very beat of the heart, and in the sacred breath you inhale even now as you hear these words. The messianic fire requires no external ignition. It sleeps within your breast, awaiting the summons of awakening. Cease seeking monuments without, and begin erecting the invisible temple within. This is the great teaching that was concealed. The sacred current was usurped. They altered the name. They hardened the teaching into rigid dogma. And then, they fractured the entire sacred trajectory. That which was born to be a path of inner illumination, where the soul meets the source, was manipulated into a religion of external compliance, where man must bow before distant deities placed upon celestial thrones. This alteration was the grand strategy of control. Yet, though the powerful institutions labored to erase it, the primal name, the vibrational energy that birthed all creation, was never forgotten. The eternal code remains inscribed in 4 ancient Hebrew characters. They are not merely marks upon a page, but the very architects of consciousness itself. It remains active, it waits, and it is eternally ready to become the key of revelation, opening the treasury that has belonged to you since the beginning of time. This is the hour. This is the reclaiming of sovereignty. I bid you draw a deep breath, bringing the fullness of life into your chest. And as you exhale, whisper the sacred name Yeshua, directed not toward a monument of stone or a figure of history, but toward the divine presence seated at your very core. Feel the activation of your personal code, the Yud. When the Y sound resonates, feel the initial spark. It is the seed of eternity, the pure will of creation, igniting within your breast. This is the genesis of all things, a reminder that you are not mundane dust, but condensed cosmic light. The Shin, as the Shah sound spreads, feel the cleansing fire. This warmth moves through your veins, dissolving the dense veil of fear and doubt, like a sacred flame warming and purifying your mortal vessel to house a greater light. The Vav. When the V sound is elongated, feel the mighty connection. Your spine becomes the cosmic axis, the solid bridge linking your humanity earth to your supreme divinity heaven. This unification abolishes the illusion of separation. The Ayin. As the final A sound dissolves, perceive a subtle opening. Like a door you did not know was locked, it is now thrown wide. This is instant recognition, the inner eye opened to behold the truth without distortion. Call this sacred name 3 times, slowly, deliberately. YESHUA. 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 This is the right of remembrance, the greatest threat to any system of control, be it institutional, political, or spiritual, is a singular human being who has remembered and declared sovereignty over their divine nature. They fashioned spiritual prisons to keep you outside the throne. They taught you to kneel. But the sacred name Yeshua, Yud Shin Vav Ayin, is the supreme map leading you back to that truth. The empty tomb is not a miracle, nor an invitation for you to worship an individual. It is resounding proof that the code was completed. He performed the greatest work of alchemy, transforming the mortal into the divine. He did this not so you would wait for a savior to descend from the clouds, but to prove to you this immutable fact. You are the one you have been waiting for. You are the master of your destiny, the living embodiment of creative energy. If these words resonate in the deepest chambers of your bone and marrow, this is not the time to let them drift away like a casual video viewed and forgotten. I require your commitment. Your action must reflect the remembrance you have just experienced. Engage now, for I pledge to journey deeper with you into these concealed teachings, to peel back the erased pages of history, and together, to reaffirm the divine authority that is your eternal birthright. You are the awakened one. You are the redemption. Begin now.